My husband, Robert, forbade me from the cabin in the woods for our entire 25 years of marriage. It was his one unmovable rule, a strange, dark corner in an otherwise open and loving relationship. "It's my private space, Clara," he'd say, his voice gentle but firm, leaving no room for argument. A place for me to think. I never pressed it. I trusted him. When the heart attack took him suddenly at 58, my world shattered into a million unrecognizable pieces. His lawyer, a kind but weary man named Mr. Abernathy, sat across from me in his stuffy office, the air thick with the scent of old paper and stale coffee. He slid a small, ornate iron key across the polished mahogany desk. "It's yours now, Clara. The cabin, the land, everything. It's all in clause 17B of the will." He paused, his gaze heavy. "But be careful what you find." As I drove home, his words echoed in my mind, a chilling premonition that froze the grief in my veins and replaced it with a cold, creeping dread. I knew I had to go. The key felt impossibly heavy in my palm, its cold iron a stark contrast to the warmth of my skin. For years, I'd imagined what that cabin looked like, picturing a rustic, dusty retreat filled with fishing gear and old books. Robert was a simple man, or so I thought. The mystery he'd built around this place now felt less like a quirky need for privacy and more like a carefully constructed wall. My daughter, Jessica, had pleaded with me not to go alone. "Mom, wait for me. We can go next weekend," she'd urged over the phone, her voice tight with concern. But I couldn't wait. The need to understand this secret part of my husband's life was a physical ache, a gnawing hunger for truth that overshadowed my fear. People from our small town in Ohio have been so kind, and I'd love to hear what city or state you're watching from in the comments below. Their support meant the world, but this was a journey I had to take by myself. For myself. I needed to face whatever was waiting for me behind that forbidden door. The key was my only map. Mr. Abernathy's warning replayed in my thoughts as I packed a small overnight bag. "Be careful what you find." It wasn't a casual remark. It was a weighted statement, delivered with the gravity of someone who knew more than he was letting on. I wondered what he'd seen or heard. Had Robert confided in him? The legal documents were straightforward. I was the sole beneficiary of his entire estate, valued at just over $200,000, including the cabin and its 50 acres, located at 344 Hemlock Lane. Everything was meticulously in order, a testament to Robert's organized nature. Yet, this one secret remained, a loose thread in the perfectly woven tapestry of our life together. I packed a flashlight, a thermos of hot tea, and the photo album from our last anniversary. I wanted to bring a piece of our shared happiness with me, a talisman against whatever darkness might reside in that place. The drive would take 3 hours, deep into the rolling hills of the state forest. I clutched the iron key, determined to unlock the final chapter of my husband's story. The further I drove from the familiar comfort of our suburban home, the more the anxiety tightened its grip around my chest. Paved roads gave way to gravel, and then to a narrow, rutted dirt path nearly swallowed by overgrown ferns and looming pine trees. The GPS had given up 10 miles back. I was navigating by a hand-drawn map Robert had left tucked inside an old atlas, its lines faded and corners softened with age. The existence of this map was another small puzzle. Why draw it by hand when he could have just printed one? It felt intentionally secretive, meant only for him. The air grew cooler, scented with damp earth and pine needles. When I finally saw it, tucked into a clearing at the end of the path, the cabin was not what I had expected. It was larger, more solid, built of dark, hand-hewn logs with a wide stone chimney. It looked less like a fisherman's retreat and more like a fortress. A single window stared out like a vacant eye, and my blood ran cold. I parked the car, the crunch of twigs under the tires sounding unnaturally loud in the profound silence of the woods. For a long moment, I just sat there, my hands gripping the steering wheel, my heart pounding against my ribs like a trapped bird. The cabin seemed to be watching me, holding its breath. There was no sign of neglect. The path to the door was clear of weeds, and the windows, though dark, were unbroken. Someone had been maintaining this place. Had it been Robert, on his supposed fishing trips? Or someone else? I finally forced myself out of the car, the iron key feeling like a block of ice in my hand. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of recent rain. As I approached the heavy oak door, I noticed the lock was not a simple padlock, but a complex, old-world deadbolt, its metal gleaming faintly in the dappled afternoon light. This wasn't about keeping animals out. This was about keeping people out. Specifically, it felt like it was about keeping me out. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, I inserted the key into the lock. It turned with a well-oiled, nearly silent click that seemed to echo in the stillness. The sound was so smooth, so effortless, that it confirmed my suspicion. This door was used regularly. My hand trembled as I pushed it open. The hinges didn't creak. The first thing that hit me was the smell. It wasn't the expected musty scent of a closed-up cabin. It smelled of lemon polish, old books, and something else. A faint, lingering floral perfume that I did not recognize. It was a scent I had never, not once, smelled on Robert's clothes. The main room was immaculate. A large stone fireplace dominated one wall, its hearth swept clean. A comfortable-looking leather armchair was angled toward it, a handmade quilt draped over its back. On a small table beside the chair sat a single porcelain teacup and saucer, perfectly clean, as if waiting for a guest. This wasn't a man's solitary retreat. This was a home. I felt a wave of dizziness, and I had to grip the doorframe to steady myself as the truth began to dawn. The cabin was a single large open-plan room with a small kitchenette tucked into one corner and a loft for sleeping above. Everything was tidy, clean, and strangely impersonal, like a high-end rental property between guests. Yet there were signs of life everywhere. A stack of recent magazines on the coffee table, publications on gardening and literature that Robert had no interest in. The quilt on the chair was a complex, beautiful patchwork of a style I knew he didn't appreciate. My gaze swept the room, searching for something, anything, that felt like my husband. I saw his favorite brand of coffee by the small stove and a shelf of woodworking tools, neatly organized. But they felt like props on a stage, placed to create an illusion. The feeling of being an intruder was overwhelming. This space wasn't his. It was theirs. I walked over to the small bookshelf and ran my fingers over the spines. Tucked between worn copies of classic novels, my fingers brushed against a small, leather-bound journal. My heart stopped. I knew I had to open it. The journal was bound in soft, dark green leather with no markings on the cover. It felt warm to the touch, as if someone had just set it down. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely unlatch the small brass clasp. I sat in the leather armchair, the unfamiliar quilt scratching against my arms, and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was not Robert's familiar masculine scrawl. It was a delicate, flowing script, unmistakably feminine. The first entry was dated June 4th, 2000, just 5 years into our marriage. "He brought me here today," it began. "He calls it our sanctuary, a place where the world can't touch us." My breath caught in my throat. I couldn't breathe. I flipped through the pages, a blur of years chronicling a life I never knew existed. Picnics by the creek, Christmases spent by the fire, arguments and reconciliations. It was a detailed, intimate account of a long and loving relationship, a complete second life, running in parallel to mine, hidden away in these woods. The journal detailed 20 years of secrets. I slammed the journal shut, a strangled sob escaping my lips. The sound was swallowed by the thick, silent walls of the cabin. Betrayal was a cold, sharp blade twisting in my gut. 20 years. He had been with this other woman for 20 years. The fishing trips, the business conferences, the weekends he needed to clear his head. It was all a lie. A meticulously crafted 20-year-long deception. I stood up, my legs unsteady, and paced the small room like a caged animal. Every object seemed to mock me. The teacup, the quilt, the gardening magazines. They were all hers. I was the ghost in this home, the unwelcome stranger. I felt a surge of white-hot anger, so intense it made me dizzy. I wanted to scream, to smash that perfect little teacup against the stone hearth, to tear the quilt to shreds. How could he do this? How could the man I loved, the man who held my hand while our daughter was born, live such a profound lie? I had to know who she was. I needed to see her face. My eyes scanned the room, desperately searching for a photograph, a name, anything to give a face to the woman who had stolen half of my husband's life. On the mantelpiece, nestled between two pine cones, was a small silver picture frame, turned face down. My heart hammered against my ribs as I reached for it. It was heavier than I expected. I could feel the smooth, cool glass against my fingertips as I slowly, deliberately turned it over. The woman in the photograph was beautiful, with kind eyes and a warm, open smile. She had dark, curly hair and a spray of freckles across her nose. She looked to be about my age. And standing beside her, his arm wrapped possessively around her waist, was Robert. He was smiling, a genuine, unburdened smile I hadn't seen on his face in years. They were standing in front of this very cabin, bathed in the golden light of a summer afternoon. They looked happy. They looked right. The sight of it shattered the last remnants of my composure. I sank to the floor, the photograph clutched in my hand, and finally let the tears come. After what felt like an eternity, my sobs subsided, leaving behind a hollow, aching emptiness. I sat on the floor, the polished wood cold against my skin, and stared at the photograph. The woman's smile felt like a personal insult. Who was she? Did she know about me? Did she know she was sharing a man with another woman, a wife, a family? The journal was still on the chair, a silent testament to their shared history. I knew the answers were likely inside, but I couldn't bring myself to open it again. Not yet. The pain was too raw. I needed to think, to process the enormity of this betrayal. I looked around the cabin, this monument to my husband's deceit. My gaze fell upon a small, locked wooden box on the bookshelf. It was made of cherry wood, the same kind Robert used in his workshop at home. It was intricately carved with ivy leaves, and unlike the front door, the lock was small and tarnished. It seemed out of place in the otherwise pristine cabin. My apathetic grief sharpened into a focused curiosity. I had to know what was inside. The box was locked tight, and there was no key in sight. I tried to pry it open with my fingernails, then with the edge of a letter opener from a small desk in the corner, but the lid wouldn't budge. It was a puzzle box, I realized, of the type Robert used to love making. There had to be a trick to it. I ran my fingers over the carved ivy, feeling for a hidden latch or a loose piece of wood. Nothing. Frustration mounted, mixing with my grief and anger. This box felt important. Another piece of the secret life he had so carefully hidden from me. I thought back to the key Mr. Abernathy had given me. It was ornate, with a distinctive clover-shaped head. On a whim, I examined the carvings on the box more closely. Hidden amongst the ivy leaves, nearly invisible to the naked eye, was a tiny, perfectly carved clover. It wasn't a keyhole. It was an indentation, an inlay. I pulled the heavy iron key from my pocket. It was too large to be for this box, but perhaps it served another purpose. This is the first ad breather. I stood up and walked to the small kitchenette, my movements stiff and robotic. The silence of the cabin was unnerving, broken only by the sound of my own ragged breathing. I filled the kettle with water from the tap and set it on the small electric stove. The simple domestic act was a strange comfort, a piece of my normal life in this completely alien environment. While the water heated, I wandered back to the main room, avoiding the armchair and the damning journal. My eyes drifted to the loft above. A simple wooden ladder led up to it. I knew I should go up there, that I needed to see everything, but a part of me was terrified of what else I might find. What other secrets was this place holding? The whistle of the kettle pierced the silence, a shrill, insistent sound that broke my trance. I made myself a cup of tea, my hands shaking as I poured the hot water over the bag. The familiar aroma of chamomile did little to soothe the storm raging inside me. The warmth of the teacup in my hands grounded me slightly. I sat at the small kitchen table, staring out the window at the dense, whispering woods. The sun was beginning to dip below the trees, casting long, eerie shadows across the clearing. I couldn't stay here overnight. The thought of sleeping in this bed, in this house built on lies, was unbearable. I needed to find what was in that box and then leave this place for good. My mind returned to the key and the clover carving. It was a long shot, but I had to try. I retrieved the iron key and the cherry wood box. I carefully placed the clover-shaped head of the key into the matching indentation on the box. It fit perfectly, like a missing puzzle piece. I pressed down gently, and with a soft click, a hidden seam appeared along the side of the box. It wasn't a lid. The entire side panel slid open, revealing a small, velvet-lined compartment. My breath hitched. Inside, nestled on the dark blue velvet, was not a letter or another photograph, but a stack of official-looking documents held together by a paperclip. The documents were birth certificates. 2 of them. The first was for a boy named Daniel, born 18 years ago. The second was for a girl, Sarah, born 15 years ago. My eyes scanned down the pages, my vision blurring. Father's name, Robert Miller. My Robert. Mother's name, Catherine Moreau. Catherine. So that was her name. The beautiful, smiling woman in the photograph. He hadn't just had a mistress. He had another family, 2 children, a son who was now a man and a daughter who was a teenager. The floor seemed to tilt beneath my feet. I had spent years thinking our daughter, Jessica, was his whole world. He had coached her soccer team, helped her with her calculus homework, walked her down the aisle. How could he have had 2 other children, a whole other life, and kept it completely hidden? The betrayal was no longer just about me and him. It was about Jessica. He had stolen her right to know her own siblings, her own flesh and blood. The anger returned, cold and clear. This wasn't just about a secret affair. This was a crime against our entire family. I carefully placed the birth certificates back in the box, my mind racing. Catherine Moreau. The name was unfamiliar. I pulled out my phone, grateful for the single bar of service I was getting. I typed her name into the search bar, my thumb hovering over the enter button. Was I ready for this? Was I ready to see the life she had built online? A life that included my husband? Steeling myself, I pressed search. The results were immediate. There were several Catherine Moreaus, but one stood out. Her profile picture was a more recent version of the woman in the photograph, her dark hair now tinged with silver at the temples, but her smile was the same. Her profile listed her as a widowed high school English teacher living in a town called Northwood, only about an hour's drive from the cabin. Widowed. The word hit me like a physical blow. She was presenting herself as his widow. Had he told her we were divorced? Had he faked his own death in one life to live fully in the other? The lies just kept spiraling, deeper and more tangled than I could have ever imagined. I had to get out of there. The cabin felt like it was closing in on me, the walls saturated with 20 years of deception. I grabbed the journal, the photograph, and the wooden box containing the birth certificates. I couldn't leave them here. They were my proof, the only tangible evidence of the life Robert had hidden from me. I didn't bother to lock the door behind me. Let the animals have it. Let the woods reclaim this place. As I drove away, the cabin shrinking in my rearview mirror, a single thought consumed me. I had to go to Northwood. I had to see this woman, Catherine Moreau. I needed to look her in the eye and understand how this happened. Was she a victim in this too, fed a different set of lies? Or was she a willing participant in Robert's grand deception? My grief had been burned away, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just a grieving widow anymore. I was an investigator, and I would not rest until I had uncovered the entire truth, no matter how painful it was. The sun had set, and I was driving into the darkness. The 1-hour drive to Northwood felt like an eternity. My mind was a chaotic storm of questions and scenarios. What would I say? How would I introduce myself? Hello? I'm the other wife of your recently deceased partner. The absurdity of it was almost laughable, if it weren't so tragic. I pictured her children, Daniel and Sarah. They were grieving a father they believed was entirely theirs. What would this revelation do to them? What right did I have to detonate a bomb in the middle of their lives? For a moment, I considered turning back, going home, and trying to forget everything I had discovered. I could sell the cabin without ever setting foot in it again. I could pretend this day never happened, but I knew I couldn't. The truth, however ugly, was out, and I couldn't stuff it back into the box. Robert had left behind a legacy of lies, and it was up to me, his legal wife, to untangle it. My daughter Jessica deserved to know the full story. His deception hadn't just affected me, it had fundamentally altered the reality of our entire family tree. I arrived in Northwood just after 9 p.m. It was a quaint, picturesque town, the kind with a central town square and streets lined with historic Victorian houses. It was the sort of place Robert had always claimed to dislike, calling it too fussy. Another lie. According to her online profile, Catherine lived at 114 Maple Avenue. I found the street easily. It was quiet, idyllic, with manicured lawns and glowing porch lights. Number 114 was a beautiful two-story home with a wraparound porch and a large oak tree in the front yard. Lights were on inside. I could see silhouettes moving behind the curtains. A family at home, mourning their loss. I parked my car across the street, my engine off, and just watched. I felt like a spy, a stalker, but I couldn't bring myself to get out of the car. What was I hoping to achieve? A confrontation? An explanation? A part of me just wanted to see her, to confirm that the woman on my screen was the same one living in this perfect house, in this perfect town, with my husband's other children. Suddenly, the front door opened, and a young man who looked to be about 18 stepped out onto the porch. He had Robert's height and build, and the same thoughtful expression my husband wore when he was deep in thought. It was Daniel. My breath caught in my throat. He was real. He was Robert's son. He sat on the porch swing, scrolling through his phone, his face illuminated by the screen's blue light. A few minutes later, a teenage girl joined him. Sarah. She had Catherine's dark, curly hair and Robert's eyes. They looked so normal, so whole. They were a family. My family, in a way I could never have imagined. Seeing them, real and tangible, shifted something inside me. My anger softened, replaced by a profound, overwhelming sadness. They were victims, too. They had lost their father, and they were living a lie, just as I had been. I couldn't bring myself to knock on that door, to shatter their world with my truth. Not tonight. I put the car in drive and pulled away, my mission for the evening changing. I needed a plan. I drove until I found a small, nondescript motel on the edge of town. After checking in, I collapsed onto the stiff bed. The evidence spread out before me. The journal, the photo, the birth certificates. I needed help. I couldn't do this alone. I picked up my phone and called the one person I knew would understand, the one person who had a right to be as angry as I was, our daughter, Jessica. It was late, but she answered on the second ring. "Mom? Are you okay? Where are you?" Her voice was filled with a mixture of panic and relief. I took a deep breath. "Jessie, honey, I'm fine. I'm in a motel, but I need you to listen to me very carefully." I went to the cabin, and I found something. Something about Dad. I proceeded to tell her everything, my voice steady despite the tremor in my hands. I told her about the journal, the photograph, Catherine, and the two children. There was a long, stunned silence on the other end of the line. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "He had another family?" The next morning, Jessica arrived at my motel room. The 4-hour drive had left her looking exhausted, but her eyes were clear and determined. She hugged me tightly, a silent transfer of strength and shared grief. We sat together on the edge of the bed and went through the evidence again. Jessica, a paralegal, examined the birth certificates with a professional's eye. "They're official, Mom. Filed with the state. This is real." She read passages from the journal, her expression hardening with each page. "She writes as if you don't exist," Jessica said, her voice laced with disbelief. "She calls herself Mrs. Miller in some of the later entries. She believed she was his wife." The pieces were starting to form a disturbing picture. It seemed likely that Catherine Moreau was not a willing accomplice, but another victim, deceived just as thoroughly as we were. Robert hadn't just been a bigamist in spirit. He had created two entirely separate, sealed realities. "What do we do now?" I asked, my voice feeling small. Jessica closed the journal. "First, we get a lawyer. Not Mr. Abernathy, someone new. Second, we need to understand the financial implications. Dad's life insurance, his pension. Who did he name as the beneficiary? My second ad breather." We spent the next hour making a list, a plan of action that felt both surreal and necessary. The sterile motel room became our war room. Jessica, ever practical, took charge. She found a highly rated family law attorney in a nearby city and scheduled a consultation for the following afternoon. While she was on the phone, I found myself staring at the photograph of Robert and Catherine. I tried to reconcile the man in that picture, happy, relaxed, in love, with the husband I knew, who had become increasingly distant and preoccupied in recent years. I had attributed his moodiness to work stress, to the pressures of getting older. Now I saw it for what it was, the strain of maintaining an elaborate, years-long lie. The weight of his deception must have been immense. It was a strange and unsettling thought, but for a fleeting moment, I almost felt a sliver of pity for him. He had built himself a cage with 2 doors, and I wondered if he had ever truly felt free in either of his lives. The thought vanished as quickly as it came, replaced by the cold reality of the mess he left behind. We decided we needed more information before meeting with the lawyer. We had Catherine's name and address, but we knew nothing about her financial situation or her legal connection to Robert. Jessica, using her skills as a paralegal, began to dig into public records. "Okay, I've got something," she said, after 30 minutes of typing furiously on her laptop. "She owns the house on Maple Avenue. The deed is in her name only, Catherine Moreau. She bought it 19 years ago. There's no mortgage on it. It was paid for in cash." My jaw dropped. The house was worth at least $400,000. Where would a high school teacher get that kind of money? "It gets weirder," Jessica continued, her brow furrowed. "I can't find any record of a marriage license for Robert Miller and Catherine Moreau in this state, or any surrounding state. As far as the law is concerned, they were never married." This was a crucial piece of the puzzle. She believed she was his wife, but legally she had no claim. But what about the children? "Robert is listed as the father on the birth certificates," Jessica confirmed. "He acknowledged paternity. They are his legal heirs, just as much as I am." The implications were staggering. If Robert's will named me as the sole beneficiary, but he had 2 other legal children, things were about to get incredibly complicated. The will would almost certainly be contested. "We need to see the will again, Mom," Jessica said, her voice urgent. "Every single word of it. Specifically, we need to know if it mentions Daniel and Sarah by name." I remembered Mr. Abernathy's strange warning. Be careful what you find. Had he known about the other family? As Robert's lawyer for over 30 years, it was possible. Did his professional obligation prevent him from telling me? We packed up our things, the motel room feeling too small for the magnitude of our discovery. Our next stop was Mr. Abernathy's office. We needed answers, and we needed a complete copy of Robert's last will and testament. The drive back to my hometown was tense. We were no longer just a grieving mother and daughter. We were partners, united against the ghost of a man we were realizing we never truly knew. The fight for our future, and for the truth, was just beginning. Mr. Abernathy looked surprised to see us, his tired eyes widening slightly when Jessica followed me into his office. "Clara, Jessica, is everything all right?" he asked, gesturing for us to sit. I placed the cherrywood box on his desk and slid it toward him. "You told me to be careful what I found, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my voice cold and even. "I think it's time you tell me what you know." I opened the box and laid one of the birth certificates on top of it. He looked at the name, Daniel Miller, and the weariness in his face deepened. He let out a long, slow sigh, the sound of a man who had been holding a secret for far too long. "I had my suspicions," he admitted, his voice low. "Robert was a very private man. He made some unusual financial arrangements over the years, large cash withdrawals, private trust accounts. I advised against it, but he was insistent. He confessed that he didn't know the specifics, only that Robert was sending a significant amount of money somewhere every month. He had honored his client's confidentiality, but he had always feared a day like this would come." Jessica cut to the chase. "We need to see a full copy of my father's will. Now." Mr. Abernathy nodded, understanding immediately. He retrieved the thick document from a filing cabinet and spread it across his desk. We huddled over it, and Jessica's finger ran down the page, stopping at the section on heirs. The language was precise and devastating. "I give, devise, and bequeath my entire estate, real and personal, to my beloved wife Clara Miller," she read aloud. "Should she predecease me, my estate shall be divided equally among my surviving children." It didn't name them, it just said children. Legally, that included Daniel and Sarah. But then, Jessica pointed to a later clause, an addendum dated just 6 months before Robert's death. Notwithstanding the foregoing, it read, the property located at 344 Hemlock Lane and the associated trust account number 785B shall be transferred in its entirety to the trust established for the benefit of Daniel Miller and Sarah Miller. He had provided for them. He had a secret trust account just for the cabin and presumably their upbringing. The will was a complex web of legal clauses designed to manage his 2 separate lives after his death. The secret trust account, 785B, was the key. According to the documents Mr. Abernathy provided, it was held at a different bank from our primary accounts. The balance was just over $500,000. It seemed Robert had siphoned off money for years to create a nest egg for his other family. In a strange, twisted way, he had tried to do the right thing by everyone, but the foundation of it all was a lie. So, what happens now? I asked, looking from the lawyer to my daughter. Catherine will likely be notified by the trust's executor, Mr. Abernathy explained. She will find out about you, and you about her, through legal channels. Robert must have assumed this would all come out after he was gone. Jessica shook her head. We can't let it happen like that. We can't let lawyers be the first point of contact. Those kids, they don't deserve to find out their entire life was a lie from a stranger in a suit. She was right. As much as I was hurting, I couldn't punish those children for their father's sins. They were innocent. I looked at Jessica, a new resolve forming within me. Then we have to go back to Northwood, I said. We have to talk to her. This time, when we pulled up to the house on Maple Avenue, it was with a clear purpose. It was a sunny Saturday afternoon, and a teenage girl, Sarah, it had to be, was in the front yard, trimming rose bushes with her mother. Catherine Moreau was just as she appeared in the photograph, though a little older, her face etched with a recent, profound sadness. My heart pounded in my chest. This was it. Jessica squeezed my hand. We can do this, Mom. We got out of the car and walked up the stone path. Catherine looked up as we approached, a polite but questioning smile on her face. Can I help you? She asked, her voice pleasant. Her eyes flickered between me and Jessica, a flicker of confusion in their depths. She could see the resemblance. I took a deep breath. My name is Clara Miller, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. And this is my daughter Jessica. I was married to Robert Miller for 25 years. Catherine's smile vanished. Her face went pale, and the gardening shears slipped from her hand, clattering onto the stone path. The color drained from her face as she stared at me, then at Jessica, recognition dawning in her eyes. Sarah dropped her own shears and rushed to her mother's side. Mom, are you okay? Who are these people? Catherine didn't seem to hear her. She just stared at me, her eyes wide with shock and dawning horror. What did you say? She whispered, her voice trembling. I'm Robert's wife, I repeated gently but firmly. His legal wife. The words hung in the air between us, heavy and irrefutable. Catherine stumbled backward, and Jessica reached out to steady her, but she flinched away. No, Catherine stammered, shaking her head in denial. No, that's not possible. Robert and I, we were married for 20 years. Sarah looked utterly bewildered, her eyes darting between the 3 of us. Mom, what's going on? She pleaded. It was then that the front door opened, and Daniel stepped out. He took one look at the scene, his pale mother, his confused sister, and the 2 strangers in his yard, and his expression darkened. Is there a problem here? He asked, his voice low and protective. He had Robert's protective stance, the same way he would stand when he felt his family was threatened. The irony was a bitter pill to swallow. We need to talk, Jessica said calmly, addressing them all. Inside. This isn't a conversation for the front lawn. Catherine, looking dazed, nodded numbly and led us into the house. The interior was warm and inviting, filled with books and family photos. Dozens of them. Robert at birthday parties, Robert on family vacations to the beach, Robert carving a Thanksgiving turkey. An entire life I had no idea existed, documented and displayed for all to see. We all sat down in the living room, the silence thick with tension and unspoken questions. I started from the beginning. I told them about my marriage to Robert, showing them my wedding ring and a photo of our wedding day from my wallet. I told them about the cabin, the key, and the documents I had found. I laid the cherry wood box on the coffee table and opened it, revealing the birth certificates and the journal. Catherine stared at the journal, her journal, as if it were a venomous snake. "He told me he was divorced," she whispered, her voice breaking. "He said his first wife was a bitter woman who lived in another state. He said his daughter wanted nothing to do with him. The lies were more cruel and calculated than I could have imagined. He had painted me as a monster to justify his actions, to keep his two worlds from ever colliding." Daniel and Sarah listened, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and growing anger. Daniel picked up the birth certificate with Jessica's name on it. He compared the father's signature to the one on his own. They were identical. "So our whole life, it's been a lie?" Sarah asked, tears welling in her eyes. "Our dad? He had a whole other family?" I nodded, my heart aching for these children. "I'm so sorry," I said, and I meant it. "I didn't know about any of you until 2 days ago." Catherine finally looked up from the journal, her eyes filled with a pain that mirrored my own. "I didn't know either," she said, her voice raw. "He told me his work required him to travel constantly. He was a consultant, he said. I never questioned it. I loved him. I trusted him." In that moment, the anger I had felt toward her completely dissolved. She wasn't my rival. She was my fellow victim, another woman who had loved a man who didn't fully exist. We spent the next few hours talking, piecing together the timeline of Robert's double life. The inconsistencies were glaring now that we could compare notes. The business trips that lined up with her family vacations, the weekends he spent at a conference were the weekends he was here, coaching Daniel's Little League team. He had used his job as a long-haul logistics manager as the perfect cover, his long absences a normal part of our life, and a convenient excuse for his life with them. We discovered he had 2 phones, 2 wallets, 2 separate sets of identities. He was Robert Miller, husband and father, in both towns. It was a breathtakingly audacious and cruel deception. As we talked, something shifted in the room. The initial shock and hostility began to fade, replaced by a strange sense of shared experience. We were 2 families, broken and betrayed by the same man, now forced to confront the wreckage he had left behind. We had a common enemy and a common problem. What to do next? The legal and financial tangle was immense, but the emotional fallout was even greater. We were all connected now, whether we liked it or not. Jessica, ever the pragmatist, laid out the legal situation as she understood it. "According to the will, Mom inherits the primary estate. Catherine, you and the children are the beneficiaries of the cabin and a separate trust fund. The problem is, as his legal children, Daniel and Sarah have the right to contest the will and claim a larger share of the main estate. It could get messy. It could drag on for years and cost a fortune in legal fees." Catherine looked overwhelmed. I don't want to fight," she said, shaking her head. "I just want to understand." Daniel, however, looked angry. "He lied to all of us. He abandoned us in a way. We deserve more than just some cabin in the woods." He had a point. He and his sister had been wronged just as much as Jessica and I had. They had been deprived of a father who was fully present and deprived of the inheritance that rightfully should have been theirs. It was a mess of Robert's making, and we were the ones left to clean it up. A legal battle would only create more pain and division. There had to be a better way. I looked around the room at these strangers who were now inextricably part of my family. I saw my own grief reflected in Catherine's eyes, my daughter's anger in Daniel's, and a deep, soul-crushing confusion in Sarah's. Robert had built a wall between our families for 20 years, but now that it had crumbled, I felt an unexpected urge to build a bridge instead. "We're not going to fight," I announced, my voice clear and certain. "We're not going to let this destroy us. Robert's lies have caused enough damage. We're going to handle this ourselves, with fairness and respect." I proposed a deal. We would not go to court. We would work with a mediator to divide the entire estate, the house I lived in, the money, the trust fund, everything, equally and fairly among all of his dependents. We would split it 3 ways, between his 3 children. Jessica would get her third, and Daniel and Sarah would share the other 2/3. Catherine and I, his 2 wives, would have to figure out our own paths forward. but his children would be provided for. It was a radical idea, one that would mean selling my own home, but it felt right. There was a stunned silence in the room. Daniel looked at me, his anger softening into disbelief. "You'd do that? You'd give up your own home?" I nodded. "It's just a house. You've all lost a father. Jessica has lost the father she thought she had. Money can't fix that, but it can provide security. It's what he should have done. It's the only way to make this right." Catherine started to cry, quiet tears of what looked like relief. "Thank you," she whispered. Jessica, who had been listening intently, reached over and took my hand. "I agree, Mom. It's the right thing to do." We spent the rest of the afternoon working out the broad strokes of our agreement. We would sell both the cabin and my house. The proceeds, combined with Robert's life insurance and savings, would be put into a single pot. After paying off any debts, the remainder would be divided. It was a difficult, painful conversation, but it was also constructive. For the first time since I'd opened that cabin door, I felt a glimmer of hope. We were turning Robert's chaotic legacy into something orderly and just. Before we left, Catherine pulled me aside. "There's something else you should see," she said, leading me to a small office at the back of the house. On the desk was a computer, its screen displaying a complex spreadsheet. "Robert managed our finances," she explained. "He called this his legacy project. I never understood it." I looked closer. It was a detailed ledger of all his assets, both from our life and from hers. He had been tracking everything, moving money between accounts, investing, and planning. At the bottom of the spreadsheet was a set of instructions, a final note dated the week before he died. It read, "In the event of my death, execute the plan, consolidate all assets, divide equally between Clara, Catherine, Daniel, Sarah, and Jessica. Abernathy has the primary documents. The key is with Clara." My blood ran cold. He had planned for this. He knew we would find out. He had left us a roadmap, a confession, and a solution all in one. He just didn't have the courage to execute it himself while he was alive. He had left the hardest part, the emotional collision of his two worlds, to us. The discovery of the spreadsheet changed everything. It wasn't just my idea to be fair, it was his final deathbed wish. It seemed that in the end, his conscience had gotten the better of him. He had created a mess, but he had also left behind the instructions to clean it up. The document gave us a clear, legal path forward. It would still be complicated, but it was a plan, written in his own words. It was a strange sort of validation, a final admission of his responsibilities to both families. As Jessica and I drove away from Northwood that evening, the mood was somber but not hopeless. We had faced the worst of it and had come out the other side with a plan. We were no longer victims of Robert's secrets, but architects of our own shared future. The road ahead would be long. There would be grief, anger, and difficult conversations. But we would face it together. This strange, broken, blended family, united by the man who had torn us all apart. The journey had started with a key to a forbidden cabin, but it had unlocked so much more than just a door. The next few weeks were a blur of lawyers, mediators, and paperwork. True to his final wishes, we consolidated all of Robert's assets. It was a monumental task. We sold my family home of 25 years, and Catherine prepared to sell her house in Northwood. We closed bank accounts, cashed in stocks, and processed the $1,200,000 life insurance policy, which, to my surprise, had been legally structured to be paid into his estate rather than to me directly, another part of his meticulous, posthumous plan. Saying goodbye to my home was harder than I expected. Every room held a memory, a ghost of the life I thought I had. Jessica helped me pack, and we cried as we wrapped the wedding china and took down the family photos. But with each box we sealed, I felt a sense of release. I was packing away the past, making room for an unknown future. Catherine and I spoke on the phone regularly, our conversations awkward but necessary. We were two generals on opposite sides of a war we never wanted, now working together to broker a peace. We talked about our children, our homes, and sometimes cautiously, we talked about him. During one of our calls, Catherine told me more about the journal. "He encouraged me to write in it," she said, her voice quiet. "He bought me a new one every few years. He said he wanted us to have a record of our life together, something for the children to read one day. The calculated cruelty of it was breathtaking. He had curated his own legacy, creating a false history for one family while erasing the other. Yet, there was an object that appeared in both our lives, a small, intricate piece of his deception that I hadn't yet understood. It was a silver locket he had given me on our 10th anniversary. It was heart-shaped, with a single, small diamond chip. Inside was a picture of me and a baby Jessica. I wore it every day. Catherine described an identical locket he had given her on what she believed was their 10th anniversary. It has a picture of me and baby Daniel inside, she told me. He said he had it specially made, that it was one of a kind. He had given his two wives identical symbols of his unique love. My third ad breather. The process of dismantling a life is slow and methodical. There were moments when the sheer weight of the logistics threatened to overwhelm me. One afternoon, while sorting through a box of Robert's old office supplies from our house, I found a small, velvet bag. Inside was not a locket, but a single, exquisitely crafted silver key, much smaller and more delicate than the iron key to the cabin. It was ornate, shaped like a twisting vine. I had no idea what it was for. It didn't fit any of the locks in our house. I almost threw it away, dismissing it as a remnant from an old piece of furniture. But something made me pause. Robert wasn't a man who kept meaningless things. Every object he owned had a purpose. I slipped the key into my pocket, a small, unsolved mystery in a sea of overwhelming revelations. It felt like another loose thread, another piece of the puzzle he had left for us to solve. For now, it would have to wait. There were more pressing matters to attend to, like the final mediation session scheduled for the following week. The day of the mediation arrived, gray and overcast, matching my mood. We all met in a neutral, sterile conference room. Me, Jessica, Catherine, Daniel, and Sarah. Two sets of families sitting across a large table from each other with a mediator at the head. The total value of the consolidated estate was laid out on the table. $3,450,000 after all debts were settled. Robert's spreadsheet had been clear in its instructions: divide it 5 ways. Each of us, Clara, Catherine, Jessica, Daniel, and Sarah, was to receive a share of $690,000. For a moment, nobody spoke. The number hung in the air, a final, astonishing testament to the double life Robert had managed to finance. Daniel looked at his mother, then at me. So, that's it? We just sign the papers and walk away? The mediator nodded. If you are all in agreement, yes. This settlement is legally binding and will prevent any future claims on the estate. I looked at Catherine. We had both lost a husband, a home, and the reality we thought we knew. No amount of money could compensate for that. But for our children, it was a future. It was a clean break. We all signed the papers. The stroke of the pen felt both monumental and anticlimactic. The legal battle was over before it had even begun. Afterward, we stood awkwardly in the hallway. Sarah, who had been quiet the entire time, walked over to Jessica. I saw pictures of you, she said softly. In the cabin. Dad kept a photo album there, hidden in the loft. You were a little girl. Jessica's eyes widened. He did? Sarah nodded. He used to tell us stories about his first daughter. He said you were a brilliant artist who lived in Europe and didn't want to be found. He made you sound so magical. The lies he told were so intricate, so filled with a strange, protective detail. He hadn't just erased Jessica. He had turned her into a fairy tale character for his other children. It was both a kindness and a profound cruelty. He had allowed them to know of her existence, but only on his own fictional terms. This revelation, more than anything, highlighted the deep, fractured complexity of the man we had all loved and lost. He was not a simple monster. He was something far more complicated. A few weeks later, as I was packing the last of my belongings into boxes for storage, I came across the silver locket Robert had given me. I hadn't worn it since the day I discovered the truth. I held it in my hand, the metal now feeling cold and foreign. On a whim, I decided to examine it more closely. I thought about the identical locket he had given Catherine. One of a kind, he had told us both. As I turned it over and over in my palm, my thumb pressed into the intricate filigree on the back. I felt a tiny, almost imperceptible click. A small seam appeared along the edge of the locket's backing. It wasn't just a simple picture holder. There was a hidden compartment. My heart began to race. With trembling fingers, I pried open the back panel. Inside, folded into a tiny square, was not another picture, but a minuscule piece of paper. It looked like a receipt or a claim ticket. Unfolding it, I saw it was for a safe deposit box. The box was at a bank in a third town, a place halfway between my home and Northwood. It was a town he often passed through for his work. The small, vine-shaped silver key. It flashed in my mind. I scrambled through my purse, my fingers closing around the key I'd found in his desk. It had to be for this. The next morning, I drove to the bank listed on the slip. I presented the key and the claim ticket to the bank manager, my stomach in knots. I had no idea what I would find. More secrets? More lies? The manager led me to the vault and opened the box. It was small, but it was packed full. On top was a single, thick envelope with, "For Clara and Catherine," written in Robert's handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Inside was a letter. "My dearest Clara and Catherine," it began. "If you are reading this, then my two worlds have finally collided, and I am gone. I cannot ask for your forgiveness, because what I have done is unforgivable. I loved you both. That is the only truth I have left. I was a coward, too weak to make a choice, and so I chose everything, and in doing so, I have hurt you all." It was a full confession, a rambling, guilt-ridden account of how his double life began and how he couldn't find a way to end it. Beneath the letter were more documents, stock certificates, bonds, and the deed to a small commercial property I never knew he owned. But the most important items were at the very bottom of the box. Two notarized, legally amended versions of his will. They were identical to the one Mr. Abernathy had, with one critical difference. A handwritten codicil, dated 2 days before his death, was attached to each. It stated, "All previous versions of this will are to be considered drafts. This is my final testament. I direct that my entire consolidated estate be divided into 3 equal shares. 1 share for my first wife, Clara Miller. 1 share for my partner, Catherine Moreau. And the final third to be divided equally among my 3 children, Jessica, Daniel, and Sarah." He had done it. At the very end, he had tried to make it right. He had legally provided for Catherine, elevating her from a mistress to an equal partner in his legacy. This document would have superseded everything else. He just never had the chance to file it with his lawyer. This changed the entire equation. The discovery of the final, amended, will send a shockwave through our fragile peace. The mediation agreement we had all signed was based on the old will. This new document fundamentally changed the distribution of the estate, giving both Catherine and me a full share, equal to the combined share of the children. It was a legal grenade. Our lawyers advised us that the codicil, though not officially filed, was handwritten, signed, and notarized, making it a very strong legal document. We could go back, void the mediation agreement, and relitigate based on this new evidence. Daniel was immediately in favor of it. "This is what he wanted," he argued. "It's fairer. It gives our mom security." But Jessica was more hesitant. "We all made an agreement," she said. "We signed the papers. Is it right to undo that now?" It put me and Catherine in an impossible position. Accepting this new will would mean taking money that we had already agreed would go to the children. It felt like a betrayal of the truce we had all worked so hard to build. We were at a crossroads once again. I called Catherine. We needed to decide, just the 2 of us, how to proceed. "What do you want to do?" I asked her, my voice tired. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "I want to do what's best for our children," she said finally. "All of our children." Robert's final letter. He was so full of regret. He was trying to give me a legal standing, to acknowledge me. But I don't need a larger share of his money to feel validated. I have my sons and my daughter. You have Jessica. We talked for over an hour, not about money or legalities, but about our lives, our futures, and the strange bond that had formed between us. We were the only 2 people on Earth who truly understood the depth of Robert's deception. In the end, we made a decision. We would honor the agreement we had all made together in that conference room. The agreement based on fairness and mutual respect, not on the last-minute guilt-ridden wishes of a dead man. We would present the new will to our children, but we would tell them that we, their mothers, were choosing to stick to the original plan. We gathered the children together one last time, this time at a neutral restaurant halfway between our old towns. I laid the amended will and Robert's final letter on the table. "We found this," I explained. "Legally, it changes things. It would give your mother and me a much larger share." I watched their faces as they read the letter. I saw the flicker of hope in Daniel's eyes and the flicker of conflict in Jessica's. Before anyone could argue, Catherine spoke. "Your father made his choices," she said, her voice firm. "And now we are making ours. Your mother and I have decided that we are going to stick to our original agreement, the one we all made together. The 5 of us." Daniel looked stunned. "But Mom, this gives you—" "It gives me what Robert thought I should have," she interrupted gently. "But what I need is for this to be over. I need us to be able to move forward without any more fighting. We are a family now, a strange and complicated one, and we will start this new chapter on a foundation of fairness that we all built together." And so we did. We instructed our lawyers to file the amended will with the court, but to also file our legally binding mediation agreement, making our 5-way split the final court-approved outcome. It was an unusual legal move, but it was our move. In the end, the estate was divided exactly as we had first agreed. Each of us received our share, a clean start. The cabin in the woods, the source of all the secrets, was sold to a young family looking for a weekend retreat. I never set foot in it again. The proceeds from that sale went into the pot with everything else. The cherry wood box, the journal, and the photographs I gave to Daniel and Sarah. It was their history, however painful. The silver locket I put away in a box. I couldn't bear to wear it, but I couldn't bear to throw it away either. It was a perfect, intricate symbol of a perfect, intricate lie. But its hidden compartment had held the final key, the one that allowed Robert, in the end, to tell the truth. It was his last confession and our first chance at a new beginning. A year has passed since that day. Life is different, but it is good. I bought a small condominium in a new town, a place with no memories of Robert. It's bright and sunny, and I'm slowly making it my own. Jessica and I are closer than ever. The ordeal we went through forged a bond between us that is unbreakable. She is expecting her first child, a boy, and I am going to be a grandmother. The thought fills me with a joy I thought I might never feel again. I am not just a widow, defined by my husband's betrayal. I am a mother, a grandmother, a survivor. I am starting over. My relationship with Catherine and her children is tentative, but it is real. We are not best friends, and we may never be a normal blended family. But we are connected. We send each other birthday cards and Christmas greetings. Last month, Sarah sent me a photo from her high school prom. She looked beautiful. I sent her back a picture of Jessica's sonogram. These small gestures are bridges, built across the chasm Robert left behind. We are healing, in our own ways and in our own time.